resident coach, Mitchell Spearman, has been doing some putting practice with Cara.
Right, well, I did promise you a coaching corner with Mitchell Spearman later on today, and here we are. We found a corner. It's not on the driving range or the chipping green. It's on the putting green, and we haven't been here yet with Mitch. And I have to say, this is Tiger's corner. You know, I was telling you, he always comes to the same spot on the green. Well, this is where he usually walks on, but we've got a bit more space behind us today because most of the guys are pretty much made their way out for the last of the tee times today. Anyway, Mitchell, the putting green. Unfortunately, the spectators can't get too close to the putting green at the venue this year, but it's still a very important place for the players to go through the motions before they step out each day.
Absolutely, yeah. You've got to get to the putting green and work on your stroke and work on your field. You want to see if the putting green is at the same speed as the course, so coming out here and working on that. It's a relatively flat putting green, so I think it's quite relevant to the golf course that's out there. We can see it's a pretty flat terrain, but you want to work on your stroke, work on your rhythm, see the putts going in, and get yourself ready to go out there. And if you're going to have birdie putts, you've got to knock them in.
Okay, so many points he's brought up for me already. First one is the speed of the greens, and this is the great thing about putting greens at golf courses, and the challenge they have, I suppose, is that they need to reflect the speed of the greens out on the course. How important is that so the players can really get the speed in their head and get the rhythm of their swing?
Absolutely. I mean, for every golfer at home, that's what you want to do, is before you go out and play, hit some putts on the putting green, and then when you go on that first hole, have a sense of what it was in relation to that. Try and hit I always think you want to hit as level a putt as you can when you first start, so you know what that is. Then hit a couple of uphill putts and a couple of downhill putts, so you get used to what that gauge is and what the speed is. There was rain overnight, as we know, so has that made a difference to the speed of the greens? Are they a little bit slower? And if they're slower, maybe there's a little bit less break, and if there's less break, then you've got to take that into account when you have your line as well.
Okay, so we've heard you talk about it, and we had a little chat earlier about what Nick Fowler used to do to help his putting. So let's have a little look now, just to get a bit of practical vision going. We can maybe hit a few balls a bit gently down here, but I know we've got to be a bit careful. But just talk us through what you were saying earlier on.
So what we were talking about was really the grip end of the putter here, going back and going through. If you can have a sense of how far back and through it travels. So if I want to hit a putt here to the edge of the green, so let's say that's about a 12-foot putt. If I do a practice stroke, I'm going like this. I'm presuming to be a little slow, so in my mind that's a 2-2. I feel like it's going back about 2 inches and through about 2 inches. So as I now stand over the putt and take my stroke, 2-2, here you can see we control the speed right to the edge. So that's how to do it. If I was to do a 3-3, we're going to finish up in the flower bed there because it's going to be that little bit more. So it's a good way of being able to control the speed and the distance that the putter swings throughout the stroke. And I think under pressure, that's what you're looking for, is finding a gauge that works all the time.
Well, there we go, because I suppose under pressure, if you're feeling a bit nervous, you might sort of think, oh, God, take it back. And actually, there's just a simple little reminder there to just tell you to just look at the grip handle and know how far to move it. So, Lizzie, there you go. I know I was saying 2-2, 3-3, everything else too earlier. That's what we meant. And that's very interesting. And on the note of putting, that's speed for us. I know obviously it's going to take a bit of practice, but what about, aiming and contours and reading a putting green? Because I know you were just saying this is quite flat, which is a good reflection of most of the greens out on the course, but reading a green is what challenges a few people.
It's an absolute art. I mean, for the most part, most greens are tilted a little bit from back to front on the golf course, because when you're on the fairway and you want to as the architect designed it, you need to be able to see your target. Now, sometimes some short par 3s and some par 5s will have a little bit more runaway to them. So generally speaking, most greens across the world of golf tend to slope a little bit from back to front, which means if you're on the right side, they'll tend to slope to the left, and you're on the left to the right. So that's the general rule of thumb. And the next sense is that every putting green needs a drainage area. It can't be dead flat, so it has to run off somewhere. And the old adage of where would you the bucket of water, where would the water drain, is very appropriate, because where that is where that slope tends to be. So as you walk up to a green, you can really have a sense. And if you are some of the best putters in the game, how do they read it? How do they read greens? It's not how good their eyes are. They always describe their feet. They can feel the terrain in their feet. They can feel if they're walking uphill. They can feel on their quads if they're walking downhill. So you could use your feet. I would say Tom Watson could putt without his eyes, because he uses his feet to putt for the line.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. I never would have thought of reading a green on my feet. But talking of reading a green, come on, Mitchell, let's act it out. Because most people, what do? They crouch down like this with their club and they have a read down. We obviously know Camilo Villegas has a whole other style.
Yes,
What do you think's best?
No, I think getting behind the ball to actually see the line is good too, but the key is you've got to use your most dominant eye. So if your dominant eye is your left eye, your right eye, the key is that when you're going down like that, you're using your dominant eye to see the line. Because if I use my right eye, which is my dominant eye, my whole line is different. So you need to identify which is your dominant eye, which is the one that when you put your thumb in front and then you cover up the patch, still is the eye, that it still is the target that you see. So if you do one way or the other, and your non-dominant eye will be off to the side. So that's the line that you use. You know, the old Hale Irwin thing was always the plumb bob of getting the line down over the ball and seeing it. I think that's probably less used in today's world, but it was almost part of just the routine of doing it. And there's very much a routine. How far behind the ball are you? You know, are you seeing your line? So you've got your line and you're trying to have a sense of what's happening. And the most important part of any break of the putt is closer to the hole, because that's when the ball's moving its slowest and therefore is the most greater affected. And the other thing while we're down here is when I'm hitting this putt, if I hit it past the hole, as opposed to being disappointed I've missed the putt and turning my head away, I want to be paying attention because I've got the one coming back and I should be able to learn something, right? So there's so much you can take in, what your playing partners are doing, the overall terrain of what it is. You know, in America we talk a lot about the grain, which is the direction that the grass is growing, and certain parts of America it grows towards the setting sun with certain grasses. So there's a lot of information you can gather, and through that experience that you acquire, you're able to therefore, you know, have a very good chance of knowing what the break is, and therefore use that in your senses of what you're trying to do. I see too many people maybe overline up putts to such an extent that then they just forget to hit it. So you need to have some instinct involved in this whole process of what it is that you're doing when you're trying to putt.
That's such a good point, isn't it? The fact that if you do overhit it, keep an eye on where on earth it's going, because you've got to bring it back. While we're down here, I'm going to grab this golf ball because there's quite an interesting point here. We've just spoken about reading putts. I'm going to give that to Mitchell. But what about lining up putts? Because a lot of people have a bit of a pre-shot routine for this.
Sure, it's become quite fashionable nowadays to either put a line around your ball, or for example here that you can actually see they put little arrows on either side where you set that down at what is the starting point that you want the ball to go. So if we think this is a slight left to right break, you'd sort of set it down and you would go like this, and quite often you'll see some guys just go back and double check it, and what you're trying to do is get that as your starting line. So then I'll come around this way, is now when you then stand over the ball you get the face at a right angles. Now most people like to have a line on it. This is one that doesn't, but a lot of people either have a spot or a line or sometimes several lines, and it's going back to that alignment. You're trying to get the putter face at 90 degrees to that line at the top. If I do that, then I know that if I can start the ball on that line, that is my chosen line for the putt, and it's a great way to do it. It's taking the sport to another level of science and detail to be able to give you the best chance of starting the ball on the right line.
Goodness me, I think I've taken all that in. Lizzie, you wanted a free golfing lesson. This is the place to get it. Okay, to recap, I think Mitchell's told us so many useful facts there. One of them was read the putt with the dominant eye. The second one was make sure you watch it if it goes past the hole, so you know how to bring it back. And then about lining the putt up. Many people use the line on the golf ball there we saw, and then lining up the putter to the golf ball and perhaps your feet in general stance to that. So there we go. There's a few more putting tips for you from Mitchell Spearman, who we will still track down again, I think, throughout the weekend.